This is about Africa and Western aid to Africa. The other day I answered the door to a school kid collecting for charity. It was one of these charities that tells Africans how to govern themselves without the West, and has been telling Africans how to govern themselves without the West for so long that today's Africans are the great-great-great-great-grandchildren of Africans who are being told how to govern themselves without the West by the same charity over 150 years ago. So I said to this kid, I think Africans should govern Africa. And he said, do you think they can? Which rather surprised me, a black teenager asking, can Africans govern Africa? In his school uniform, I was looking at the badge to see what it said, the London School of Oriental and African Racism. And I said, thinking Africa can't govern Africa is imperialism. That's the British Empire mentality. And he said he thought that Africa's problems were simply too great. And he's not alone about that. There's a story of a director of Oxfam in Africa on a train, and he was explaining Africa's problems to the Africans and saying the good news is that Africa can take care of itself once we've got rid of the crime and the corruption and the cycle of needless death, which is why I'm here. And a blind woman got on the train, and the director of Oxfam got up and said a perfect example of what I was saying. A blind woman gets on the train, and the only one who gets up to give her a seat is me. And he pointed to a small boy and said, can you give her your seat? I'm still talking. So the boy gave up his seat and everyone shuffled along, and the blind woman was sitting next to the director of Oxfam, who carried on listening to himself, talking about how Africa had to tackle crime and corruption and the cycle of needless death with his help. And then the train stopped, and the director of Oxfam led the blind woman off the train and outside the station, where he found a taxi driver, and he said, take this woman back to her village or wherever she wants to go. Here's $100, keep the change. Then he went back into the station. So the taxi driver looked at the position he was in, $100 in his hand and a blind passenger. So he jumped straight into his cab, drove home and spent the $100 on drugs and prostitutes. The blind woman, meanwhile, stranded all alone in an unknown town, miles from home, turned wearily back towards the station and was flattened by a speeding juggernaut. Now the little boy witnessed all this, and he ran back onto the train and told the entire carriage. And the director of Oxfam said, it's a perfect example of what I was just saying. Corruption and crime and the cycle of needless death. The taxi driver was corrupt, the juggernaut was speeding, and the old woman died for no reason. But Africa can still look after itself, and I'm here to tell you how. And on went the train, and it's still going now. The thing is that the West thinks Africa is a problem the West has to solve. But in reality, the West is a problem Africa has to solve.